For today's business brief, we're joined now by Chris Richardson. Good morning to you, Chris. Thanks very much for coming in today. I want to start with a global perspective, starting with the G20. It looks like the trade war has cooled somewhat for now. What's your view on how that will affect the world economy?
And that's still a problem because it's cooled. A truce is in place with a bunch of tariffs in place. That continues to weigh on the decisions of businesses, many of them trying to move their supply chains out of China. Other things equal, it says the world will still feel some pain from this.
So, and because a lot of companies are moving their businesses out of China and heading to countries like Vietnam and whatnot, would China be feeling the pinch there?
They are. We'll actually get some data in the next couple of days, finding out the purchasing managers' indices, as they're called. How much pain is China feeling? It's been slowing for a while. It hasn't actually hurt Australia because in response, they keep pumping up their construction sector.
The IMF mentioned a statistic a couple of days ago suggesting that if the trade war continued, that global growth would drop from 3.6% per annum to 3.1% per annum, which seems significant to me. What's your view on that? Because I guess that's not going to change now because the war's at a truce.
Yeah, so yes, we will see that slower growth. Most people are expecting that to happen. Most people are forecasting global growth just a little over 3%, the worst of those two figures.
Is that anything out of the ordinary that you...
No, look, to be honest, it's not a disaster of a slowdown. It's more a dumb slowdown. We didn't need to inflict this pain. China should change a bunch of things that it does, but getting them to do it this way doesn't seem a terribly productive way. The truce isn't necessarily likely to get us somewhere.
One of the issues that were talked about, there hasn't been a lot of detail, mind you, that Donald Trump has given about this so-called truce, is that he is sure that the Chinese are going to go back to the American farmers and reinvest in their agricultural sector because their farmers have been feeling the pinch greatly from this trade war. How much is that going to affect us here, our farmers?
And one of the winners so far have been some Australian farmers, as the push and shove between China and the US has seen the Chinese buy fewer American farm goods. Having said that, it wasn't great news when it happened. It's probably not disastrous news if it unwinds. There is a risk, though, that it more than unwinds, that the Chinese, in trying to reach a solution, bend over backwards and really wind down their purchases of Australian farm goods.
It'd be the last thing that our farmers need at the moment, given that so much of the country is in drought.
Yeah, and look, it's been a really tough time, especially along the East Coast.
Yeah. Tax cuts, something that you haven't talked much about lately. What state is Australia's economy in at the moment? What sort of effect would these tax cuts have?
Look, the tax cuts are handy. The Australian economy isn't sick, but it is softer. And that means, other things equal, that the tax cuts will help. The interest rate cuts that the Reserve Bank is doing are also helping. That combination should be enough to keep us ticking over pretty handily. Whether it'll be enough to do what the Reserve Bank would like it to do, to bring the unemployment rate from a little over 5 to closer to 4.5%, maybe not.
Will those interest rates drop tomorrow?
It's not impossible because the Reserve Bank isn't really looking at inflation. It's not going to wait until that next inflation result, which would see it wait until August. Most people still think August. Some people think this week, but either way, it's another rate cut.
Is that a concern to you at all if it goes to 1%? Because then you're starting to get to the point where there's not a great deal of wiggle room.
And that insurance question's an important one. The more the government rolls out tax cuts now, the Reserve Bank rolls out interest rate cuts, the less ammunition they have later if we're in more of a jam. And people need to realise, the good news now may come at a potential cost to good news later.
That's good information. Great insight. Chris Richardson, thank you very much for joining us here this morning.
Thanks.